You're 14. You're trying to call your friend's house. His parents pick up. You ask if he's there. They say no. That's it. No message, no voicemail, no way to reach him. You either show up or you don't. And that sounds small now, but it changed how you related to people. Back then, silence meant something. If someone didn't show up, you felt it. You didn't assume they were overwhelmed, distracted, or stuck in traffic. You just thought, maybe they didn't come. And that kind of uncertainty shapes you. The people who remember life before the internet don't think the same way as everyone else, and most people completely misunderstand why. Too young to be Gen X, too old to be a millennial. So where exactly do you belong? They call this in-between group Xennials, a microgeneration. Psychologically, this might be one of the most adaptive and conflicted generations ever. If you were born somewhere between 1977 and 1983, you fall right into this strange little gap between generations. You're basically the middle child no one knew what to do with. The term Xennial started gaining attention around 2014 when researchers realized that this group didn't fully match either generation, so they gave it a name and called it a microgeneration, a tiny slice of people shaped by a very specific moment in time. But it's not just about when you were born, it's about what was happening while you were growing up. Because Xennials didn't just live through normal change, they grew up during one of the biggest shifts in modern history, a world that went from analog to digital, almost overnight. If you're a Xennial, your childhood looked very different. You grew up with landlines, you memorized phone numbers, you knocked on doors instead of texting, you made plans with your friends, but there was no way to confirm. No texting, no "I'm running late." You just went and hoped they were there. Hanging out meant actually being there. Conversations disappeared the moment they ended. Then, everything changed. And this is where the shift becomes psychological, because it wasn't just that new tools appeared. The rules changed. How people communicate, how people wait, how people disappear, how people matter, and no one taught you the new rules. One day, you got your first phone. Not as a kid, but later. And everything changed faster than you expected. Suddenly, there was the internet, instant messaging, emails, social media, plans became texts, conversations became notifications, and being away stopped being a thing. Most generations grow up in one stable reality, but Xennials didn't. They grew up in two completely different ones, an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. And that shift happened right when you were figuring out who you are. Psychologists call this identity formation, the phase where your brain is trying to understand the world and your place in it. But for Xennials, the world kept changing. The rules weren't stable. The environment kept shifting, so your identity had to shift with it. And that creates something unusual. You didn't just adapt to change, you were shaped by change, which is why your teenage years and your 20s don't even feel like the same life. To really understand Xennials, we need to look at the brain. There's a part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for decision-making, adapting to new situations, learning complex skills. Basically, the part that helps you function like an adult. This part of the brain doesn't fully develop until around the age of 25, which means your late teens and early 20s are a period of high neuroplasticity. Your brain is still flexible, still changing, still wiring itself based on the world around you. So, the shift didn't happen after your worldview was already formed. It happened while your brain was still building its model of the world, while it was still learning what is normal, what is safe, what matters, how do people connect, and the answers kept changing in real time. Now think about when the digital world arrived. Right in the middle of that phase, Xennials were still neurologically flexible when everything shifted. The internet, mobile phones, social media, all of it showed up while your brain was still learning how the world works. Younger millennials were born into it. Older Gen X had already formed their habits. But Xennials, they were right in between. Young enough to adapt quickly, like millennials, but old enough to remember the analog world, like Gen X. So instead of rejecting technology or depending on it completely, you integrated it. Naturally, you learned it the way you learn a language. It was just part of life. And this creates a mental flexibility that most generations don't develop in the same way. You rewired alongside it. Your brain adapted as the world evolved, which is why you can switch between offline and online so easily. Why you don't panic without your phone. But also don't struggle to keep up with new apps, new systems, new tools. You weren't locked into one way of thinking. You were trained by timing itself to evolve. And there's a concept that explains Xennials better than almost anything else. You could call it psychological bilingualism, an ability to function in two completely different worlds. People from Generation X often approach technology with a bit of skepticism. Millennials, especially younger ones, have never really known a world without the internet. Xennials grew up undocumented. Your childhood wasn't stored on a server. It wasn't backed up. It wasn't searchable. It just existed. And that gave you something people today almost never get: the chance to outgrow yourself in private, to be awkward, to be wrong, to be unfinished, and then leave that version of you behind. If something embarrassing happened, it lived for a while in people's memories, and then slowly faded away. There's a concept called autobiographical memory, the way we store and recall our own life experiences, and it turns out it's not perfect. Your brain edits things, it reshapes details, it softens certain moments and highlights others. Over time, your memories don't just replay, they evolve. That's how people grow. That's how we make sense of who we are. And Xennials had the freedom to do that, because there was no permanent record holding them in place. No archive, no feed, no algorithm reminding the world who you used to be. You were allowed to evolve without being constantly dragged backward by proof. You could outgrow a version of yourself and leave it behind. Your identity had room to breathe, to change, to rewrite itself. But just as Xennials were stepping into adulthood, getting their first real jobs, trying to build a life, something big hit. The 2008 financial crisis. Jobs disappeared, companies collapsed, opportunities vanished almost overnight. And for many Xennials, everything felt uncertain. Just as they were building stability, the ground collapsed beneath them. Psychologically, early adulthood is when you form your relationship with money, risk, and security. It's when you start asking, am I safe? Can I rely on this system? Is the future predictable? But for Xennials, the answer very early on was not really. Research shows that experiencing financial instability during this stage of life can have long-term effects. It can shape how you make decisions. Even years later, you might become more cautious, more risk-aware, more focused on stability than opportunity. Even if things improve, even if your situation gets better, that early experience doesn't just disappear. It stays in the background, like a quiet voice asking, what if it all falls apart again? And this creates a very specific mindset. On one hand, Xennials are adaptable. They've already navigated massive change. But on the other hand, there's often an underlying sense of instability, a need to be prepared, a tendency to think ahead, to plan, to save, to be careful, not because they want to, but because they learn to. And this is what makes their psychology so interesting. It's not just shaped by one major transformation, but two, a technological revolution and an economic shock. You get a generation that knows how to move forward, but never completely forgets how quickly things can change. If you had to describe Xennials in one word, it would be contradictory. They're independent, but also deeply collaborative. They're skeptical, but still hopeful. They're digital, but grounded in the real world. And somehow, all of that exists at the same time. Most people try to resolve contradictions, to pick one side, to define themselves clearly. But Xennials don't do that. They don't resolve contradictions. They live inside them. And a lot of this goes back to how they grew up. Think about it. You had a childhood that looked a lot like Generation X, that builds independence. But then You stepped into adulthood during the early days of the internet, a time that felt exciting, optimistic, like technology was going to connect everyone and make life better. A very millennial kind of energy, so you ended up carrying both the self-reliance of one world and the openness of another. That's what makes them feel like they don't fully belong anywhere. In one room, you feel too young, in another, too old. You catch references that younger people don't get, but also don't fully relate to the older ones either. It's like you're always just slightly out of place. So you become fluent in adaptation. You adjust your tone, your references, your rhythm, your expectations. You learn how to fit the room. And after a while, you get so good at adapting that you sometimes wonder which version of you feels most real. Because you didn't grow up in one world, you grew up between worlds, and over time, that creates something subtle. Identity ambiguity. Not confusion exactly, but a sense that you don't fit neatly into any one label. You're not fully Generation X, and not fully Millennial either. Every generation gains something and loses something. For Xennials, that trade-off is especially clear because they didn't just hear about the change, they lived through it. They remember what it felt like to wait. And in that waiting, there was something else. Patience. They remember being fully present, conversations without interruptions, moments that weren't shared, just experienced. And maybe most importantly, they remember what it felt like to truly disconnect, to be unreachable, and okay with it. But then, with that change, came something powerful. Access, information at your fingertips, answers in seconds, connection, opportunities that didn't exist before, careers, ideas, paths that their younger selves couldn't have imagined. And this is the trade. They lost slowness, but gained speed. They lost distance, but gained reach. They lost silence, but gained the world. And because they experience both sides, they understand the value of each. They know what it means to be present and what it means to be connected. And maybe that's why they're always balancing the two, trying not to lose one while living in the other. If this felt a little too accurate, you're probably a Xennial. And if you've spent your life feeling slightly between worlds, now you know why. So here's the real question. Would you trade it? Would you rather fully belong to one world or understand both?